lots of it this week. Coming up, the Monday Political Forum here on Drive. Jason Falinski is the federal Liberal MP for Mackellar. He joins us on the line. Jason, good afternoon. Have I got him? He's there somewhere. We'll get him. Joanna Quilty is the CEO of the New South Wales Council of Social Services. Joanna, have I got you?
I'm here, Richard. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And Charisma Kalinja is a Liverpool councillor and also the Community Engagement and Development Officer at Headspace. Karishma, thank you. Have I got you?
You do, Richard. Hello, how are you?
And back to Jason. Have I got you now? No, still working on Jason. We'll get him. Now, let's start, though. The unvaccinated will have to wait until December 1, the Premier announced today, to enjoy the freedoms allowed to others on October 11. It's not quite the government forcing people to be vaccinated, but it goes some distance in that direction. They're going to have a pretty miserable 7 weeks or so unless they roll up their sleeves. So is it worth that level of compulsion given the battle against COVID-19? Karishma, what do you think?
Richard, I think there's always going to be a balance between freedoms, responsibilities and consequences. In Australia and New South Wales in particular, we've seen one of the fastest rollouts and take-ups of the COVID vaccines in the world. And we've also seen our vaccine hesitancy rates fall to single digits recently, despite the protests. But this is about a societal agreement. People have
we've lost her, I think.
Harms other people, especially some of the most vulnerable within our community. We have a responsibility to set some boundaries and think about how we protect those people within our broader community. And I think more broadly, people understand and agree with this. My local government area has been one of the hardest hit by the most recent Delta wave, and in particular, Liverpool Hospital has been at the centre of it. And so we owe it to the many frontline workers, especially in health, to try and protect them as much as we can. So similar to the way that we set speed limits to protect our community and minimise harm, there are consequences to those who choose not to comply with that. I see that as the same deal here.
Jason Falinski, do you go along with that? That we're not forcing people to get vaccinated, but we're hovering towards that, aren't we? Jason?
Hi, Richard.
Yeah,
sorry.
Gotcha.
No, we're not. We're not. I mean, it's very important that we ensure that people have a choice in this, because it's only when people feel that they have a freedom to choose that you can have confidence in that. I think when you start mandating things, that's when you start getting people asking, well, why do you have to mandate it? And look, Australia's got one of the most successful vaccination programs in the world. We're at a point where when we started this vaccination program, you had 13% of people saying that they wouldn't take the vaccine. That's now into single-digit figures, and in New South Wales, I think we're about to just tick over the 86% mark. So we're doing incredibly well, I think.
And there's got to be a snowball effect, hasn't there, within communities, within families, within neighbourhoods, where a few people get the vaccine, it goes well, they feel confident, they feel great, they feel protected, and people see this and think it becomes normalised.
Absolutely. And of course, it also feeds into the environment. So, the more people who are getting the vaccine, the more freedoms we have, the more we're learning to live with the virus, the more we're returning to the freedoms, the more we're getting our lives back, the more people see it as a good thing. So that's an important factor in what we're doing at the moment as well.
Joanna Quilty, is it fair enough to leave the vaccinators, the unvaccinated in their cave, if you will, until December 1 as partly as a way of encouraging them, I guess?
Yeah, look, Richard, we certainly know that vaccines are our path out of this pandemic, and if we want to protect each other, open up the economy and return to a sense of normalcy, then we do need a really high proportion of the community vaccinated. And I think it is a question of encouraging people to put the public interest and the common good ahead of personal preference. But that being said, I think we do have to do absolutely everything that we can to ensure that people are able to get vaccinated, because we know some locations, some groups in the community, particularly vulnerable groups, have faced a lot of barriers. The Disability Royal Commission has today put out a draft report which finds that vaccination of people with disability has been seriously deficient. and that the rollout to them was in fact deprioritised at one stage without any consultation or even public announcement of that decision. So I think we need to redress this inequity. We need to make sure that we absolutely go all out to give people with disability and other vulnerable groups every opportunity to be fully vaccinated before restrictions start to lift. Otherwise, they will be facing significant risks to their health or, curtailment of their ability to participate in their community. So I think that is the one issue that I think does need to be addressed within all of this.
Yeah, I know some people have told me that they found it very easy to book in the vaccine. It was no problem. They went down to their local chemist or whatever, very simple. But I've got a lot of listeners who've expressed to me the difficulties that they have, and by and large, they're people with good command of English and all of that. And yet they found the systems incredibly difficult, complicated, and they would book and get then knocked off and then book again. It does make you wonder what it must be like if you're new to Australia, if you've got limited English, et cetera, et cetera.
I think that's right. I think there's access to technology, there's English language barriers, there's a whole host of factors. There's, living in remote parts of the state that can really play a role in meaning it's incredibly difficult to get the vaccine, and we don't want those people to be, further disadvantaged because they're not able to participate fully in their communities.
Joanna Quilty is here, CEO of the New South Wales Council of Social Services. So is Jason Falinski, who's the federal Liberal MP for Mackellar. And so is Karishma Kalyanda, who's a Liverpool councillor and also works at Headspace. For nearly 2 months, starting on October 11, those running businesses will be expected to check the vaccine status of customers and in many areas of staff as well. It's unclear what the rules are around staff. It seems to depend on what sort of business you're operating. Is this a reasonable burden to place on business? How likely is it that businesses will actually do it? And is government doing enough to help in the process? Jason Falinski.
Rich, in terms of workers, employers have a positive obligation under the work health and safety legislation to ensure that they have a safe workplace. So they will have to come to decisions about whether not having someone who isn't vaccinated working for them creates problems in that regard, and they will need to get advice from either their lawyers or the Fair Work Ombudsman on those issues. In terms of the burden of checking whether customers have been vaccinated or not, no, I think it's a fair burden to put on businesses to do. However, I think we're at a point, as I was saying before, where we've got nearly 87% of people in New South Wales who've been vaccinated. And if you've chosen not to get vaccinated, it's really a situation now where you have been fully informed. So that's a decision that you've made. And look, it's, I think that where we're at is a point, if there is one government that has managed to look and be able to administer these things efficiently through apps, it's been Service New South Wales. So hopefully there will be programs in place that will enable employers to do that more easily. But I think there's also an issue here we have around people's privacy and decisions that they've made and what rights they have to keep those decisions to themselves. So this is a really complex area we're in, and I have to say personally I'm very glad that we're only attempting to do it for a month or two and not longer.
It is difficult with the staff business though, isn't it? Because you say you might have to ask your lawyer about it, an employment expert. That's fine if you're Colesworth. It's not very good if you're running a small business with 5 employees, is it?
Well, you can get guidance from the Fair Work Ombudsman on this, and you would need to have reason. So it's not going to be just something that everyone can impose on their workers. But where there are good reasons because of work health and safety legislation and because you have a positive obligation to have a safe working environment, then as long as you can make that argument, you could insist on everyone being fully vaccinated in your workplace. Having said that, they're decisions that each workplace will have to make. And if they're in some doubt as to whether they have a right to make that decision, then the Fair Work Ombudsman exists for the very purpose of giving people guidance on these sorts of issues.
I mean, I'm not saying this shouldn't be the law, but I do feel for people because this might be the exit point of one of your most treasured workers. You know, they've got this view about the vaccine, but in every other way, there's somebody who's worked for you perfectly for 10 years, and you have to let them go for the sake of this 7 months, for this 7-week period.
Well, it wouldn't be for a 7-week period. I suspect you'd be able to, especially if people have been working at home. And of course, there'll always be specific edge cases, and you may be able to manage that particular person in a way that means that they're not creating a health risk or they're creating an unsafe work environment. But the work health and safety laws have been in place for many, many years in Australia. I think it was actually one of the original laws that the Commonwealth passed back in 1903. And of course, we've had these sorts of pieces of legislation around since about the 1780s. So it's not a new concept that we have in place. How it's applied in this particular situation will always be interesting and left to lawyers. But I think that most businesses will, when they are allowed to have conversations with their teams, with people who work for them, one-on-one, and come up with sensible solutions, that they'll find a reasonable pathway through this. And as you say, Richard, it's 7 weeks, so it may be that a person needs to work from home for 7 weeks, or they need to have special work arrangements to ensure that the employer's positive obligation towards having a safe working environment is maintained.
Yeah, but not if you're a mechanic or operating in a call centre, or actually a call centre maybe you could do from home, but if, say, a warehouse, these are not people who can work from home.
So you might be in a situation with a warehouse, and I'm not in a position to be really giving you legal advice, so we are now in very dangerous territory. No one can take my advice on this issue. But you are in this position where in a warehouse you probably have a position where you could get someone to wear mask, PPE, and you'd almost certainly be able to create safe working distances between people. The mechanic would be typically an open air environment, maybe not. And once again, you might be able to do that job with equipment that reduces someone's risk of transmitting the disease or catching the disease. But once again, that's not going to be resolved by you and I talking hypothetically about people. They're conversations that people need to have with each other in the specific workplaces, and they do have a legal framework on which they can rely.
Okay. Jason Falinski is here, so is Krishma Kalyanda and Joanna Quilty. Joanna, it does seem as if, and I'm not saying any of this is inappropriate, maybe we have to do these things, but it's a big headache for business, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I would hope that if the technology is up to the job, hopefully the burden won't be too great. So, if it can be integrated with the Service New South Wales app, then I would think that should be relatively straightforward. I think the key is making sure that the technology works. And that businesses and other organisations who have to comply have got enough time to comply, to test it, and to be ready well before October the 11th.
But what about the staff issue, though?
Yeah, look, I certainly think keeping the rules and the requirements as simple as possible is going to be really important in terms of helping everyone to get ready. We know in the social services space there have been different rules regarding vaccination of your staff depending on, what type of service you are, whether you're federally or state funded, even, getting down to where you're located. It makes it incredibly complex, and as Jason was suggesting, or I think you were suggesting, Richard, it's smaller organisations who are going to find it really challenging to implement. But look, I think most businesses have really adapted well to things like QR codes, to needing to limit patrons, the distancing requirements and other things. So I don't see why there wouldn't be any reason why they wouldn't do the same now. And, it's certainly in their interest to comply. All
right. And, come December 1, you can breathe a sigh of relief, I guess, in terms of managing this thing, because then the divisions between vaccinated and unvaccinated, again, whether this, I'm not arguing this is a good policy or a bad policy, but for better or worse, that then dissolves on December 1. Now, Paul Keating has launched a spirited attack on both the government and his own Labor Party over the new deal with the UK and the US, saying Australia was trading away its own sovereignty in favour of what he called a faded and jaded Anglosphere. in the process turning its back on, again to quote him, the 21st century, the century of Asia. Now, Keating's spray included everyone from the PM to Labor's Penny Wong, but does he have a point? Krishma.
Richard, I think he raises some important points that we do need to take into consideration. I noticed in Penny Wong's response, she mentioned that there are access to security briefings and other information that are not obviously widely accessible, and that's why the decision was made. And I think that's precisely the point. A lot of the people who are required to respond to the government's stance that they've taken on various aspects of not just China but Asia more broadly don't have access to some of that information and some of those briefings, and yet they're still required to respond. So, we go back to the fact that in the 90s when Keating was Prime Minister, he really progressed this idea of Australia finding security in Asia rather than security from Asia. And it seems like in the last few years, the government sort of taken us back to a mindset of finding security from Asia, which I think doesn't serve us well in the long run.
Yeah. Jason Falinski, this was, a big announcement for the government. Labor basically largely backed it in. That seems to have angered Mr. Keating.
Yeah, it did. I think that this is a disappointing moment. I mean, Paul Keating was quite a visionary treasurer and prime minister, especially when it came to Asia. But I think his attacks are just unfounded. The fact of the matter is that we have we live in a very fluid and dynamic region of the world now, and let's call a spade, that there is a contest of ideas being waged at the moment between free and democratic societies and authoritarian and directed and centrally planned societies. And, for Keating's criticism to be true, it would mean that the Quad does not include India and Japan in it. And the fact of the matter is that we have taken a very important step to ensure that we have a number of pieces in place that makes it very difficult for any player in the Asian region to undertake unilateral action, and it creates a very important deterrent. And this government will always put the security and safety of both this nation and its people ahead of other concerns. So what we've done is strengthen a relationship with the United States. We've strengthened our relationship with India and with Japan, and we are strengthening our ties with other Asian nations. And the fact is that Australia should be very proud of itself at the moment, because a number of people in this region are looking to Australia as an alternative to that centralised authoritarian model, which is seeking to assert its dominance in this region.
What about his sovereignty? Sorry, I don't know what that is. What about his sovereignty point, Jason? Essentially, he's saying if you base all your technology, for instance, the submarines will be really this nuclear power source in a box that, according to some people, can be turned off or turned on. It would certainly need the Americans to service it and keep it up to scratch. That's handing over a lot of power, admittedly to a long-standing ally, but there's a sovereignty issue there, isn't there?
Well, Keating's allegation in that respect is both unfounded and unwarranted. The whole point of this alliance is that there would be technology transfer and development between the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia. So we will be equal partners in development of new technology to ensure that we have some of the best defence equipment in the world, and we are doing so, and let's be clear, we are doing so to ensure the safety and security of both this nation and this region, and indeed the success and survival of open and liberal societies. That's what this is about. So Keating's allegation that somehow a technology will exist with a kill switch somewhere in the Pentagon is not only wrong, it's wrong-headed as well. And it seems to me that his that his analysis of this situation is really driven by a conclusion he wanted to reach, and then he sought evidence to justify that conclusion.
Yeah, we've been listening to Jason Falinski, Federal Liberal MP from Mackellar, to Krishma Kalyanda from Liverpool Councillor and the Community Engagement and Development Officer at Headspace, and also to Joanna Quilty as the CEO of the New South Wales Council of Social Services. Joanna, what did you make of Mr Keating's intervention?
Well, Richard, I'm not an expert on these matters, but clearly we do need to be mindful of the realignment of geopolitics that's going on around us and an increasingly assertive China. But I do think the AUKUS deal raises a lot of questions that we, the public, haven't got answers on. You know, there's the practical issues about how much is it going to cost us to get out of this deal with France? How much will the new deal cost, given we won't sign on the dotted line for 12 to 18 months? And I have to say that it is frustrating that many billions of dollars involved in this defence initiative seem to be forthcoming without any question, whereas whenever the need for a new social program is put forward, the first question is inevitably, how on earth are we going to pay for it? But, you know, that aside, we also need to know what this new deal with the UK and the US will mean for keeping peace in our region and de-escalating tensions. I think it would be really good to understand this, and I just don't think we have the answers on a lot of these issues.
Joanna, thank you. Jason Falinski, Joanna Quilty and Krishma Kalyanda. Let me ask you finally, I don't know what it says about our priorities, but some special things happen when we reach 80%. In New South Wales, among them vertical drinking, to use the Deputy Premier's phrase. I hadn't heard that phrase before today, but, you know, it's essentially means standing up against the bar and having a beer. Alongside church attendance, even for the unvaccinated, that happens at 80% too. We've prioritised that. And the chance to go camping in the regions. What are you most looking forward to? What are your priorities, in other words, whether it's at 70 or 80%? Jason Falinski.
Richard, at the moment I look like Cousin It. So, Tony Biasi, my barber, better get the hedges out because I'm on my way when that happens. But I have to say on a serious note, I think we as a state have really failed to prioritise education and education of our children, and particularly getting schools open. So while I personally will be very much in favour of barbers reopening, I really hope that in the next week the New South Wales government can do something about getting schools reopened.
Because at the moment that's October. I think I've got this right. That's October 25, right? The schools reopening, but the bars are reopening on October 11.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
you can vertically drink before you can vertically learn. Joanna Quilty, what are you looking forward to, Joanna?
Yes, look, certainly similar to Jason, I'm desperate for that haircut, not just for me, but for other members of my household who are looking a little bit shabby and could all do with some sprucing up. But I am really keen to get down to visit my mother in Shepparton. I know that's going to rely on borders reopening, and I'm not sure that is part of the plan at 70% or even 80%. But they've been through the ringer down there. They've had, you know, outbreaks and lockdowns and just recently the earthquake. She's turned 85 in the last few months. My stepfather has turned 90. So I'm looking forward to celebrating those milestones with them. It's probably going to be sitting down drinking rather than vertical drinking, I suspect. But yes, very much. As long
as it's not horizontal, that's the thing to avoid.
Well, it may end up that way. Let's see.
Charisma, what's the thing you're most looking forward to?
Look, I think reflecting on the last few months, something that I've really missed is connecting with my community and, you know, being out and about. And at the moment, it's peak Indian festival season. And this is sort of, I think, the first year where pretty much everything has either been transferred online or is cancelled, and it's just not the same. So I'm really looking forward to being able to celebrate some of those important cultural milestones with people more broadly in the community. But speaking of milestones and vertical drinking, my birthday's in early December, so I'm hoping I can have a vertical drink or two with more than two other people. In time for that.
I'm sure you will. Just on the Indian festival season, as you describe it, what's the best moment in the Indian festival season? What's your favourite bit?
Oh, look, I think most people see or have been to Indian festivals as sort of large events with, performances and, lots of people and that sort of thing. But the way I've experienced them is more in sort of going to people's homes and having a meal with them and kind of sharing time with them. That's my recollection, and those are my favourite bits of festivals, being able to spend really intimate time with people in their home and having a meal.
Well, it'll happen. It will. all these clouds are going to disperse at some point. We just hope it's soon. According to Casey Briggs, who does all the numbers for us at the ABC, we could hit 80%. The Freedom-ish Day could happen as early as October 18 if everyone rolls their sleeves up. If not, he says it'll probably be the Monday after that. But yeah, even at 80%, those freedoms of 80% are starting to loom, and certainly the freedoms of October 11 are not far off as well. As the Premier said today, we've just got to keep going for this last 2 weeks and, try to stay the course. We're out of time, but thank you very much to Jason Falinski, who's the Federal Liberal MP for Mackellar. Jason, thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
And to Joanna Quilty, the CEO of the New South Wales Council of Social Services. Joanna, thank you very much.
No worries, Richard.
And Karishma Kalyanda, Liverpool councillor and the Development Officer at Headspace. Hey, thanks, Karishma. Rise and fall and rise again of things like the Go-Go Mobile. It's 6 o'clock.